Good afternoon, and welcome to the Engineering Talent Awards nominee interviews. This is a series of webinar interviews led by myself and Fayon Dixon in discussion with those who have been nominated at this year's awards. The Engineering Talent Awards are hosted by Equal Engineers. Equal Engineers are an organisation focused on improving the diversity and inclusion of the engineering industry. The awards were, of course, scheduled to take place in April, but due to the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, are now scheduled to take place in the future. A link to this and all the webinars in the series will be available for sharing once each is complete. In today's webinar, I'm here talking to Joseph Agnew, who was nominated for Engineering Graduate of the Year. Joseph joined Wood as a graduate process engineer in 2018, upon graduating with a first-class Masters of Engineering in Chemical Engineering from the University of Nottingham. Joseph has been an active member of Wood's Diversity and Inclusion Group, participating in STEM activities designed to promote engineering as a career to young people. Joseph is an elected member of the iChemie Congress, representing early careers. He is also chair of the working group for member engagement. Welcome to Joseph. Hi.
Hi, David. Thank you. Welcome.
How are you doing?
How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Yeah, good. Thanks. Good. Yeah. Ready to get going.
Excellent. Well, in that case, I shall pretty much jump straight in if you're happy. Let's get some questions going. So, what is it you do as an engineer now on a day-to-day basis? Oh, have we lost you, Joseph? Are you still with us?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm still here. I'm still here. Oh.
I can hear you. I'm not sure we can see you.
How about now? How about it's come back?
Yeah, you're back with us. Just trying to put
Okay, sorry, temporary. Never. I'll start again. All I was saying was, so I work for Wood in Reading, which is actually my hometown, coincidentally. So it was quite handy that I managed to secure a graduate role actually where I'm from. So Wood's an engineering services company, about 60,000 employees worldwide, working in a range of different industries, from oil and gas to renewables, that sort of thing. But my role, as you mentioned, is a graduate process engineer. So for people who don't know what that means, that's people who have done a chemical engineering degree normally. And chemical engineers, they take things from their raw material and process it into the final products on a large scale. So for example, I work in the oil and gas industry. So I design the equipment, the pipelines, the layout for all the necessary units, processing units to treat the oil and gas that comes out of the well and goes into our cars, for example, as petrol. So it expands quite a big range of things. So I mentioned I'm in oil and gas, but I can work in chemicals, petrochemicals, that sort of thing. And on a day-to-day basis, I'm looking at kind of hydraulic calculations, so sizing pumps, getting the right drawings, P&IDs, that sort of thing, which stand for piping and instrumentation diagrams, but also looking at summaries, that sort of thing, for some of the biggest clients around the world.
So that sounds like a very adult job. Yeah,
it was a big step up, I have to say, from university. Yeah.
I imagine. So was this always an industry that interested you, or when did you sort of really think about chemical engineering?
That's a good question. So kind of when I got into my final year, I had done a placement year, which I'm sure we'll come on to, but that was kind of to give me a benchmark as to see whether engineering was a career that I wanted to pursue post-graduation. And it was. This is good news. And then obviously I started to look at what are the sort of career options within that, what are the different industries. And for me, oil and gas, although it's not, some would say it's a kind of dying industry, and in a lot of cases it is, and for the right reasons in terms of climate change. But for me, I really wanted a traditional experience to apply the theoretical knowledge that I'd learned at university in the real world. And traditionally, chemical engineering is kind of based on oil and gas principles, so process separation, that sort of thing. And it's got a lot of high pressures, high temperatures. So you have to consider safety to quite a high detail. So that was important to me, to get that sort of grounding in the theoretical knowledge that I'd learned. The other thing that I'm quite interested in the industry, it's quite fast paced. So things get done quickly, they get built quickly. They're not necessarily constrained by as many government kind of regulations as maybe some of the other industries are. And the other thing is quite topical, quite political. So obviously, as the word, the kind of buzzword that gets thrown around is the energy transition, and big companies striving towards net zero in 2050 in terms of their carbon emissions. So it's interesting. Every day is different, and there's a lot going on in the news that's relevant to what I do. So that kind of keeps you interested in ticking along in terms of enjoying the industry and that sort of thing.
Amazing. It's interesting to me what you said about it being quite a fast-paced industry, because a lot of engineers that I've spoken to during these webinars, but also just in life, I mean, their jobs obviously are varied and amazing, but certainly you do often get the impression that there is a long process, that things can move very slowly, which obviously makes sense when health and safety can be such a concern. But it must be nice to, as you say, to work somewhere where it is actually quite fast-paced.
I mean, it definitely has its pros and cons. I mean, when you're under the cosh a bit at work
Under the
and
pressure.
the deadlines are coming up, yeah, you really feel the pressure there. But it's good. I mean, the projects themselves last anywhere between 6 months and 2 years, depending on the size of the project. And so it's good to get a good variation and change in the work that you're doing, if it's only for 6 months. But at the same time, you can really go into depth on what you're working on if you're on the project from the start all the way to the finish.
Oh, so hopefully a little bit the best of both worlds.
Absolutely. A bit of variety and a bit of depth as well.
So big question next that I ask everybody, but feel free to answer in your own way. While in engineering, have you ever had to overcome adversity? And if so, can you explain?
Sure. So I come from a middle-class background. And I went to a state school that, kind of going to university is the norm. So in terms of that side of things, there wasn't necessarily any barriers. But having said that, I'm actually severely deaf in my left ear. So I mean, if you see me going like that at all, then then you know why when I'm trying to hear what you're saying. I have got the volume on full tilt, so it should be okay. And this is actually something that I inherited from my nan of all people. And it's my 3 bones that kind of normally vibrate in your ear when the sound is heard are fused together. So I don't get the same kind of depth of sound traveling down my ear. And when I was younger at school, it wasn't necessarily an issue, apart from when my friend was whispering to me in assembly, and I couldn't really hear what they were saying. And I'm like, yeah, all right, got yeah, speak to you later. But as I've got older, it's actually got worse. I don't know if that's because the build up in my ear has got worse. I'm not sure. Wax and stuff. I hope not. But also as I've got older and kind of got into work, and I've understood how important communication is between colleagues in order to be, successful in what you're working on. So it's little things that I do now to kind of manage the kind of disability and adversity on a day-to-day basis. So I could never answer the phone to my left ear, so I've always got the phone in my right ear. If I go into an important meeting or a meeting with my manager, I'll always sit so that my right ear is closest to them. And as mentioned, I tilt my ear as well, and little things like that I don't know I'm doing subconsciously, and then I mention it to people, and they say, "Oh yeah, I knew you were doing that," and you think, "Oh right, how many people have noticed that before?" So it's it's living with it day to day. Hopefully, it doesn't get any worse. But I do have a hearing aid. I haven't got it in at the minute, but if I need it, then I've got it.
Amazing. I mean, I think, as you say, it's the little things probably that you start doing sort of automatically that you've done your whole life. As you say, like, I have a friend actually who has pretty much, I believe, exactly the same thing. I'd hate to say, I'm pretty sure. And I fall foul of always standing on the wrong side of him when we go to lunch at work. And he always has to stop and walk behind me. And I'm like, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
And I'm awful. I do and I'm like, I need to remember this. But so yeah, those sort of little coping mechanisms that you have obviously input for yourself, you probably don't even notice you're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. And And there are options. I mean, not like other, certain adversities that I can have surgery and things to hopefully correct it. But, when you've got the coping mechanisms day to day and, you can handle it, it's not something that I've really considered yet. But whether
Okay.
that becomes a thing in the future, we'll have to see.
Yeah. So how does it feel to be nominated for the awards this year?
It's fantastic, yeah. Been a bit of a shock, I must say as well. It was my manager, my line manager, who wanted to nominate me for the award.
Very nice.
So obviously, first of all, that was massive thanks to him, and that was a kind of pat on the back that the kind of the technical work that I'm doing is, he believes I'm capable and my company views me as capable, but also recognition for the the extracurricular voluntary work that I do to promote STEM and stuff. I did have a look at some of the other finalists within my category, and it's such a high caliber of young engineers who really are voicing all the right things on the right platforms, to promote diversity and inclusion within STEM. So yeah, a real honour, and all I can say is I really thank my manager, I thank my company, I thank, of course, Equal Engineers, and the judging board for selecting me as a finalist.
I love the fact that you've done your research on the other candidates. That's fantastic. I'm sure the others probably have
But
too. They haven't admitted it. I like that. No, I know. I like a bit of research. And as you say, it's always nice, isn't it? I mean, I think most people get into any job, hopefully for for the right reasons because they're passionate and they're interested. Certainly, I think that's the case with most engineers I've spoken to. But it's still nice to to get that recognition, especially when it does come from a line manager, because if nothing else, it tells you that you're going in the right direction, which we all like to hear sometimes.
Absolutely. Couldn't
So,
agree more.
what was this one does actually always interest me. It's sort of relevant to your category, but as somebody who trained in a very random career myself, what was the transition like from student to actually working in the industry? I mean, was the learning curve steep, or was it as you expected?
It's a really good question, actually, and it was very steep, I could say, mainly because you leave university, you've got your master's degree, it's a very technical degree to study, and it's quite a difficult degree to study. And you think you know it all. You can't help it. It's like the same at every stage of education, whether it's GCSE, then sixth form, then university. You kind of top of the pile, and then you start work, and you're back at the bottom. So it's a big transition, and of course, because it's quite a technical degree, you have the theoretical grounding, but you don't necessarily know how that's applied in industry, and the other things you don't really know kind of the specifics of the industry that you're going into, because my degree was quite broad in terms of its basic principles. So it's a big step up in terms of learning where the right information is, the right sources that you need to go to complete the tasks that you have. And then on top of that, I got thrown into a big project at the start, and you had loads of people to meet. It was towards the tail end of its execution, so it was quite manic and fast paced. So there's a lot to get used to, and on the side of that, there's the routine of work. So I can't imagine there's many students that get up at 6 a.m. Monday to Friday to get into work for 7. So making that transition to the work stamina, I like to call it, when you're getting up that early every day, is another thing. And I think the final thing is the systems that you use in the office, whether it's completing your time card or booking holiday, those sorts of things. There's a lot to learn on the company systems to kind of top it all off. So yeah, I would say in summary, a very steep learning curve.
I do think it's all those little things, isn't it, that that everyone has to do, like you say, learning the internal system, learning, booking your holiday, as you say, whatever the review system might be like. It's those things that really take up usually the first week of any employment. And it's those sort of things that nobody ever covers in school or in college or university. A bit like doing taxes. And you think this is quite fundamental. Like,
Yeah.
why did no one talk to me about this earlier? And what you said about work life is so true. I mean, I had a completely opposite experience because I went to dance school when all my friends were at university. So they were all, doing what you said, university hours, and I'm sure working very hard, but they, started at a reasonable time and they had sort of, free periods, etc. Well, dance school, you're in for warm up at 8 and you're usually there rehearsing till 6 pretty much every day. So it was more intense than actually school was. So when it came to work, I was sort of kind of like, oh, this is pretty much straightforward. In fact, when you actually
Yeah,
get work as a dancer, it's usually the opposite. You start nice and late in your day, you know, and you finish quite early. And then if you're working, you do a
yeah,
show in the evening. So that transition that you just mentioned, I think, is really interesting, going from student hours just to the 9 to 5 of being in work. And what you said about doing quite a broad degree is also fascinating, because, of course, the broader the degree you do, in many ways, people always say it's more useful because, of course, you can, you know, parlay into different areas, which is true. But of course, as you say, you then hit the learning curve when you get somewhere specific, you know, which obviously is a disadvantage from not having done something more specific. So there's always that way up, always that toss up between the two. So as we said earlier, or as I said in the introduction, you're an active member of Wood's Diversity and Inclusion Group, encouraging young people to look at a STEM career. What do those activities entail?
yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, Wood as a whole has a big focus on D&I, on quite a large company community. So we have a platform that we use called Yammer, and there's a D&I group which everyone can be a member of, and everyone is encouraged to be a member of. And that's really a platform to celebrate and share the sort of great work that the company is doing around the different offices, in terms of promoting D&I. And then on a more sort of local scale, so in my Reading office, we have kind of the individual committees that support and champion those sorts of initiatives. So, for example, I chair the STEM group in my Reading office, and that involves a lot of things, from predominantly looking at promoting STEM within schools. So we have three categories. We have primary schools, secondary schools, and sixth form. And there's different offerings that we have to promote STEM to those different age groups, because obviously they're at those different stages in their lives. They're interested in different things, and you know, talking about different things is important to educating them in terms of what they need to know at that point in their life. So primary school, we have, I mean, in total, we do about 25 events a year across schools, which is quite a lot to manage, and that's supported by other engineers within the office who go along to these schools and run the events for us. My job sort of a coordination, getting the feedback, you know, sending the emails to the school, that sort of thing, and then managing the team. So primary schools, we have assemblies where we educate them on you know, water treatment, the importance of water in life, energy, how we create energy, that sort of thing. Secondary schools, we're looking more towards careers fairs. So we attend careers fairs of years between 10 and 12, so the ages of 14 to 16, when they're making GCSE decisions, they're making A-level decisions. So, you know, we're there to promote Wood as a company, but we're also educating them on the different career paths to get into the different engineering disciplines. So, you know, that you need to study maths predominantly if you want to be an engineer. There's no way of kind of
Yes.
getting out of that. But also educating them on different routes, that it doesn't necessarily have to be through the degree level, but also apprenticeship routes for different types of engineering and that sort of thing. So yeah, a lot going on really.
So, and what do you find the feedback is different? I mean, well, of course it's different, but I guess the interest, I should say, is different across the different age groups. I mean, you know, at primary school, I mean, I remember when I was at school, you know, you have different people come in and show you different things, and I think primary school children, you may not keep their attention, but they're usually quite excited by whatever you're showing them. But as they go on, I guess the pool gets smaller.
It's really interesting that you said that, because we recently, before the whole COVID pandemic situation, went into a primary school and we did a spaghetti and marshmallow building challenge
Wow.
to 5 and 6 year olds. Before we did that, we gave a presentation just kind of explaining what engineers do. And all we had was one slide. We had picture of an iPhone, picture of a plane, picture of a chocolate bar. You know, we say, look, engineers, you know, who likes chocolate? And they'll go, yeah, absolutely love chocolate. And so, you know, engineers are involved at some point along the process of taking it from, you know, its raw form and processing it into the chocolate, the dairy milk that we have. So, yeah, at the early age, they're more just excited. And as you said, their engagement levels probably don't last as long. So we try to make it quite interactive. But as they get older, it's more specific questions about, you know, what do you do on a day-to-day basis? what's the degree like, what sort of subjects do I need to take. And what always amazes me is how much they know. So, it was a while since I did my GCSEs, but, they know about distillation and some common processes in oil and gas. And it's surprising when they come up to you, and you've got your big pictures behind you and they go, oh, yeah, I know about this. And yeah, it's good. And it's always a sense of satisfaction when you feel that, they've enjoyed what you've been telling them and hopefully inspired them to continue on that same path.
Yeah, no, I remember all that, getting out your Bunsen burner and trying to separate all the things out. Yeah, it's definitely not my strength. I think, yeah, engineering lost me, as you quite rightly said, when it became apparent that one required maths. I was like, and I'm out. It's been great.
Yeah.
But I'm glad, very, very glad that that's not the result for everybody. So what advice would you give to other young people that are considering a STEM career? So when you meet them and you talk to them, what are the key things that you actually say?
Yeah, the first thing I would say, probably not necessarily related to STEM, but something I always emphasize is to work hard, because there's no secret that if you want to study engineering through the academic route, then you need to get top grades in your A levels and in your subjects. But of course, there's also vocational routes in apprenticeships and that sort of thing. But it's important to work hard and to always continue learning and have a thirst for knowledge. Because I think that's important, especially when you're going into engineering. The other thing I say is, get some experience, do some work experience, speak to people that are fellow engineers, just to get an understanding of what it is they do on a day-to-day basis. As it sounds, we kind of covered it a little bit before, but of course there's such a broad range of different disciplines within engineering. So there's mechanical, chemical, electrical, and that's just civil. Well, that's just within the engineering. Obviously, you have your maths and your sciences as well. So it's important to do your background research and really understand what sort of thing they do on a day-to-day basis. But I think I'm a bit biased because obviously I enjoy engineering, and I'm great. I'd have absolutely no regrets as picking it as a subject to study. But I think the other thing to mention is, as you mentioned a little bit before, is the transferable skills that you gain.
Yes.
So it's your analytical capabilities, your teamwork. We do a lot of group projects, so it's your communication with people from different backgrounds, different cultures, and that really can be applied for a lot of different industries and a lot of different careers after graduation. So I've got friends that were very good engineers, but decided after doing their placement year that it wasn't for them, and now they work in finance in London, or they work in a whole different range of things. So yeah, that's the main thing I would say.
Funny how so many of them always end up working in finance from across every sector, isn't it?
I
But
know. It's something to do with the money, I think.
I
Yeah.
know ex-dancers that now work in finance. I think, how did you pull that one off? I have to say, I think what you said about transferable skills is so important. That's something I'm really passionate about. I think people finish their engineering, not just their engineering, sorry, finish their degrees or whatever they've trained in, and they don't necessarily realise all the other transferable skills they've picked up. And I think people can be very prone to selling themselves short. And I think it's really important that we don't do that, and that, there's more sort of encouragement towards looking at, how, okay, as you quite rightly said, maybe you don't actually now want to go into the area of engineering that you studied in, but how can you still use those skills? I think that's a great message. And also the thing about thirst for knowledge, I think, well, that should hopefully apply across every sector. I mean, you can always tell people who enjoy their job, can't you? Because they still are learning, and that's the fun of it, which is brilliant. So your first project at Wood was working on the Saudi Aramco margin development, which sounds huge, probably because it has 3 names. So 2 questions. Firstly, most importantly, did you get to go to Saudi Arabia? And secondly, as a young graduate, suddenly working, we sort of covered this, but suddenly working on such a big project, what was that like?
Yeah. So yeah, the margin development program was for Saudi Aramco, as you mentioned, and they all have quite funny words, but they just represent the different oil and gas fields within the country. So it's from the Marjan field, and they wanted to do the project as part of their strategic development for the future in terms of increasing their country infrastructure in terms of their energy oil based resources that they have. And it was a big project. So I joined it towards the tail end. As I said before, it can be quite manic. And obviously there's a lot of people to do. And the other thing is you don't really have time to learn the process and have a look at what's already been done and already produced. Then you're just kind of running around a little bit as a headless chicken, trying to make a good impression on your first few days. But absolutely thrown in at the deep end.
I think that's a universal experience that we all go through. It's a rite of passage.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, in the end, we're on hindsight looking back now. It was a fantastic experience. One of my main roles on the project was involved in the safety reviews. So after the project kind of produced its final deliverables, you get all the engineers and safety representatives in a room, and you run I don't know how to describe it. It's like a bit like an audit, but it's more like a safety review. That you check that you've designed it safely and that it's not going to blow up or cause any damage.
Slightly important,
Yeah, it's quite important. Yeah. So yeah, and it sounds like a boring role, but I was the scribe for the HAZOP, so taking the notes, and it was quite overwhelming because there's the other thing about engineering is terminology. There's a lot of different terminology that I sat there and is he really saying that? There's one thing called a pool fire, and I was like, pool? You mean like swimming pool? I go, yeah, and then you go away and you Google it, and it's where the oil spilled out on the ground, and it's literally a pool surrounding the vessel.
Wow.
So little thing. It's at the time it feels overwhelming, but it's a fantastic learning.
Yeah, I mean, you like to sort of think that those things don't happen, as a civilian like me. But yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I think again another thing that is universal, and to anybody watching this that is looking at going into a STEM career or career in engineering themselves, or somebody that's going to be graduating soon. I think that experience of being thrown in the deep end is really important for people to hear, because it's so easy to get that sort of imposter syndrome and to feel as if you're out of your depth when you're really not. It's, I think, universal across most people starting any job, and especially that first job when you leave education and you're moving into the world. It's completely normal, and I'm not sure I would trust anybody that doesn't feel that way at first.
No, I think as going to your first part of the question, obviously if I'd have been sent to Saudi, that would have been another big step up and a bit of a culture shock and another thing to adjust to. But no, I haven't actually been yet, in answer to your question. But I'm hopeful that a lot of people getting to. Say again, sorry?
Is it on the horizon? Will you be jetting off?
Well, potentially. So a lot of people do get into engineering for the traveling aspect. Yeah. Obviously, engineering is happening all around the world. And one thing actually I haven't mentioned yet is the sort of different phases of engineering projects. So you have the first stage, which is kind of conceptual study stage, when you're really looking at, can we actually do this? And then it moves into something called FEED, which stands for front end engineering design, which is where most of the projects I've been working on are, where you're taking it from concept and then to kind of detailed design. And then you have the final stage, which is called EPC. And lots of acronyms, I do apologize, but that's for engineering, procurement and construction, where you actually built the thing that you design. And it's more in that phase, in the EPC phase, where you get to visit these countries and you actually go to site and you check that it's being built in the way that you designed it to be. And having said that, because engineering is, and oil and gas, for example, is in some of the most remote locations worldwide, you can find yourself in the middle of the desert, in the Antarctic, or in the middle of the North Sea. So it really does take you all around the world. So I'm hopeful that throughout my career, I'm going to experience some of those things.
Those are some far, wide and varied travel destinations. So I think, yeah, I mean, for those people watching who might be wavering on a STEM career, I mean, come on, that's some pretty broad travel. You're not going to get anywhere else. So I think that's a very good advertisement for your industry there, Joseph. So we mentioned briefly earlier, but sort of tying in, obviously you did an internship. I mean, would you say internships are very important?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So the internship was actually part of my degree. So I did a 4-year Masters of Engineering, and then I did a year in industry after my 3rd year, before my final year. And it was something that I had to apply for and then go through the recruitment process. And the reason that I did it was to get a feel of engineering industry and to see whether it was something that I wanted to do, post graduating, which of course it was. But what I'm seeing kind of on a personal level now is it's becoming very competitive within the graduate kind of job market. And so I went to quite a few assessment centres, which were the final stage of the graduate recruitment whilst I was at university. And I didn't meet one person at those centres that hadn't done either a year in industry or a summer work, work experience internship. And so it's becoming more of the norm that, the recruitment are expecting you to see this, and that you've got some work experience and you've had some understanding and had the chance to apply some of the theory that you've learned at university. So I think they're important. And I think the other thing to take away from them is that, you learn a lot about what you don't like. And, you can sit there and you can moan that, I'm not enjoying this, I don't like this. But in reality, learning about what you don't like is just as valuable as learning about what you do like. Well, that's exactly what I found. So yeah, it was a good internship. It was a company called Infinium, which is a joint venture between Shell and ExxonMobil. And I was working more in kind of the operations side of engineering, so plant support, that sort of thing. If there was something going wrong on site, they would get in touch, and I'd have to go and do my investigation work and run my models and see if I could work out what the issue was, and then phone them back. And it was quite good, actually. You mentioned about travel. So on that particular internship, towards the end, they sent me to the site that I've been working in collaboration with. So that was to northern Italy. So I had a week-long, kind of shadowing of some of the engineers over there. So yeah, that was good. It was very hot. So I don't envy them working in their boiler suits at that sort of heat. But it was a good experience nonetheless.
That's not a bad sounding internship whatsoever. But it's interesting how you say that they're basically becoming the norm now. I mean, so I suppose if you don't get a good internship, I guess you're on a bit of a back foot, which is obviously a shame.
Yeah, I think it's definitely true of kind of the blue chip, sort of the most competitive top graduate schemes that the majority of people apply to. It's not necessarily the case for the SME or the startup or kind of the smaller scale companies, but yeah, recruiters are using it more as a kind of a tick box exercise, because they get so many applications. They're kind of looking at checking you've got the right degree, checking you've got the right grade, and then having a look to see if you've got the experience to back it up.
Yeah. That makes sense. So tell us a little bit about Wood's diversity and inclusion group. So what are the aims of the group?
Yeah, so as I said before, it's kind of a company community. And Wood as a company, the big message that they have is that Wood people and employees are their unique fingerprint, and it's really important to get the diverse range of backgrounds, different experiences, in order to kind of be successful and use the sort of different views of all the employees to kind of arrive at the right approach to being a successful company. So D&I kind of sits at at the top really of the hierarchy, and then Wood as a company has a lot of like a network framework. So they have all these different networks. So they have the STEM network, they have We Care network for people who are supporting employees who have families and members in care, that sort of thing. We have the Pride network supporting the LGBTQ plus community. And yes, so D&I sits kind of at the top and trickles down into these different networks, and is kind of overarching and supporting and making sure that any event that we do, the D&I is a core focus of that group. So for example, in the STEM network, working as chair in the Reading office, we're constantly looking at opportunities to partnership with girls only school, because there's a big hole in women, the number of women in engineering at the minute, and there's a big push to get the balance right as it should be. So for example, on the 23rd of June coming up, we have International Women in Engineering Day. So as part of the STEM and the D&I sort of group, we've planned an event where we have 4 guest speakers of different experiences. It's a webinar like this, and anyone can join, and they're really promoting STEM as a career for women, but also talking about their past experiences and why it's a good choice for young women to get involved in.
Fantastic. Sounds busy. I mean, you were, as well as this, you were elected as an early career representative to the iChemie Congress, which sounds very exciting, representing early careers, and you're now the chair of the working group for member engagement. What does that involve? It sounds vast.
Well, where do I start? It's quite a big story. So the iChemie is the Institution of Chemical Engineers, and they're a member-led society. So in order to get the views of members, to make sure that they're making the right decisions in terms of what's important to members, they created Congress. So that's got 40 seats where members were elected by their peers, and it's both a functional and regional representation. Regional being because we have members in different parts of the UK, but also worldwide. So we wanted that sort of representative view, but also functional in terms of your students. You have your early careers like myself, you have your chartered engineers, and you have your fellow members. So in order to get the full view, we needed a good range of representation of different members. So yeah, as you mentioned, I was elected in October 2018, was a bit of a shock, but also fantastic. Yeah, I really wanted to I wanted to make the most of the opportunity, so to be able to speak to members, but also to kind of try and make a difference. So one of the opportunities that came available, the group at the Congress itself was looking at different aspects within the institution, different values, different things about what's important to members. One of those things that came up was member engagement. So yeah, I put my name forward firstly to join the group, and then they asked me if I wanted to be chair, which was a fantastic opportunity to kind of be in charge of all these more senior people. Which it was quite a good thing, and it'd be good for my own personal development. But the group itself was really looking at, says it in the title, really engaging members, and the main thing that we completed was a member engagement survey. So I was in charge of kind of reviewing the sort of questions that would go into this, how this would be distributed to members, how we were going to analyse the results. So that was sent, I think February 2019 to members. We got a good response. And then, as I mentioned, part of my work was analysing the results that had come back, getting all the statistical data and determining what was important to members. And on top of that, what we can do to address issues that were common across the board. And so we're at the stage now where we're sort of implementing the changes that hopefully will address those sorts of things. But no, it's been a fantastic experience. It was quite a lot of work, but no, it was
all the best things are.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think one of the main things to mention is, of course, as we mentioned, kind of with the primary schools and the secondary schools and what's important to you changes over time. That was exactly the same once you're working. So when you're a student or when you're early careers, what you might want from the institution is different from when you're 25, 30 years into your career. You're looking for different values. You want them to support you in different ways. And so, the sort of things we were seeing would kind of skewed depending on your membership grade. So, and it's quite a difficult thing to address when you've got about 40,000 members and they're all looking at kind of wanting different things from the organisation. But it's been good nonetheless.
Amazing. It says as well here that you are invited to represent iChemie at the 24th International Congress of Chemical and Process Engineering conference in Prague. Wow, I had to read that slowly. Well, that's a pretty big honour, but I'm assuming, unfortunately, due to coronavirus, we are currently on hold with that.
Yeah, you're spot on. Unfortunately, yeah, that's not postponed at the minute, which is unfortunate because Prague is fantastic. I've been there once before, and I'm a big fan of the city. But yeah, just a bit of background on that. So there's lots of different institutions that represent chemical engineers around the world. So, for example, the iChemie is predominant in the UK, but also some other countries around the world. but you also have the AICHE, which is the American Institute of Chemical Engineers, and you have the EFCE, which is the European Federation of Chemical Engineers. So what they wanted to do, the EFCE, was to bring together all these different institutions in one central location. So every other year they hold a forum, and this year they were doing it in Prague, but I think it does move around what country it's in. So maybe next year it might be somewhere else, and I'll get the call up. But they wanted a main focus this year on young professionals, so young engineers, and they wanted to get a good, the big picture in terms of what's available in the different countries for young engineers in terms of work opportunities, volunteering opportunities, that sort of thing, and what it's like in comparison to different countries, and what they can do to sort of address, if there are any issues, or if one country is doing something that's of massive benefit, can the other countries pick this up? So yeah, and the ICME, I think there was 2 of us going, and yeah, we're lucky enough from the sort of volunteering work that I do on Congress that they asked me if I wanted to go, and I didn't hesitate when I said yes. But at the minute, we have had a few meetings with the president of the FCE and discussions about what we could discuss. And even in those, we've spoken about sort of what different opportunities there are for engineers in the UK, but also there's representatives throughout Europe and worldwide. So hopefully there will be something that comes out of it, whether it's just, even if it's a webinar like this series, for people to sign in and find out, it's of more value than not doing anything. So yeah, watch this space, I think, with that one.
Fantastic. Well, I hope you make it to Prague, because I've been doing, like everybody, lots of those online webinar quizzes with about everybody. And 3 times I've been asked which city has the most pubs per capita, and it turns out it is Prague. So why would you not want to go? But we actually had a question come in on the Q&A. So before we wrap up, I'm going to put that to you. So what can engineering institutions like ICME do on campus to encourage students to join as members and to become engaged?
It's a good question. And I think the issue kind of with the student membership is you pay your student fee, but because you're not a full member, there's certain benefits that aren't available to the student grade of membership that it is to a full member, or as a charter member, or a fellow or associate member, as I am myself. From my experience, what they do at the minute is they go to the universities, they accredit the courses, which is the main role of the ICME. So say, for example, you're doing a Masters of Engineering at a given university, the ICME will come in and check that you're being taught the right content, the right background, the right technical experience, and you also have the right sort of practical experience in your labs to accredit the degree. And that's the first step working towards chartership, is you need that academic background before you start to get the work experience and work towards chartership. In terms of what they can do, so we are working at the minute within Congress of running a student survey. So we're trying to have a look to see what they want us to do. Mainly at the minute, it's supporting them with graduate applications, that sort of thing, advertisement of graduate opportunities that are about, any internships that are about, educating them. And I think what's important to me, and what I've always been pushing, is that people study chemical engineering. I can say when I started, hold my hands up, didn't really know what it was. And how can you know what it is when you need to go and study it for 3 or 4 years to really get a good grounding? So I think what they can do for students is, produce content. And there's a national young members committee of the ICME that do this sort of thing. They post articles on LinkedIn. So I would definitely say go and check out their LinkedIn page, their Facebook page. And they post, one thing they do, they post articles about how chemical engineering influences the world that we live in. So how they can address sort of the main problems that we're facing in terms of climate change. Or for example, at the minute, the chemical engineers have been drawn in to look at how you can mass produce vaccines or PPE equipment to combat the pandemic. So I would definitely have a look at that, their LinkedIn profile, to see what they're doing. And also they post on their interviews and articles with current chemical engineers about their careers and you'll see that it's not a straight path by any means. There's lots of jagged steps and lots of different variety in terms of what you can do with a chemical engineering degree. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. And I think it's key that, you know, as you said, a lot of the things that they threw up in the survey was getting help on those very practical steps that we were discussing earlier between education and the workplace, which, you know, across all industries is often the problem. But it's interesting to see, and then to tie with everything that you just said about how, you know, knowing you want to do a career, you know, before you've studied it is always tricky. And yeah, I think lots of people go on a journey, don't they, through their education. So last question from me then. You mentioned something when we spoke before about a Lego building competition. Now that perked my interest. So obviously everybody wants to finish on a Lego story. So
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not necessarily playing with Lego 24/7, I must
sure.
say, but I might be in private. But so Wood as a company put a big focus on education. So it was voted as their global cause for this year. And as part of that, they advertised the possibility of these global cause proposals. So they wanted people in different offices to apply with an idea of how they can promote STEM within their local community. So being the chair of the Reading office, we got together and we submitted a couple of proposals, one of which was successful, which is called the Lego proposal. And it hasn't been run yet. We've got a task force in it at the minute, you know, looking at planning it and getting a kind of a project delivery plan while schools are closed. And we're hoping that, you know, either towards the end of this year or maybe next year, that we can start contacting the schools and get them on board and go into the schools. And just as a quick summary as to what that is, everyone loves playing with Lego, or at least, I mean, I certainly did when I was young. And we're targeting 13 to 14-year-olds, you know, from diverse backgrounds, from you know, all girls schools, mixed schools, you know, from less privileged schools, that sort of thing. And we want to run a competition within the schools and between the schools on Lego building. So each week we will go into the school and we will set a theme for that week, a task for that week. And so, for example, one of the things we're looking at is building bridges. So we'll give a presentation on, you know, how civil engineering and how different aspects of engineering are involved with the building of bridges. And then we'll set them a task to basically build a bridge out of Lego that will have different grading criteria, you know, how much weight it can support, how creative you've been in your design, where we can rank the teams that have competed. And then throughout the weeks, each week we'll do a summary newsletter showing all the pictures of all the great designs, and then knocking out one school each week in the competition until we arrive at the final, where they come into our office and we run the final competition and we eventually select a winner. So yeah, a lot of planning to be done, but it's exciting nonetheless, because one of my tasks for this weekend is I've been given a roller coaster as the as the design. So I've got to look at potentially how much Lego we might need to be able to do that. We were awarded £2,500, which is fantastic, from the company for this initiative. So now it's just a case of us putting it together, how we're going to execute it, and hopefully, you know, we achieve some of the things that we want to achieve. We're running the, you know, not just to educate the students about engineering, but to promote their creativity, to promote their team working skills, and to really kind of break down the stigma in engineering. I mean, if you look at engineering, a lot of people think it's dirty with hard hats and overalls, but it's really not. It's much more than that. And there's, you know, I work in an office where I wear a shirt every day, and there's such variety of career options that we kind of want to break down the stigma, so that, you know, no one is biased in terms of applying, or they don't think that it's all inclusive, because it absolutely is. So
I think that's fantastic. Using Lego as a tool to engage people is always a good idea, but obviously incredibly relevant to engineering as well. So thank you ever so much, Joseph. It was great to speak to you.
And thank you for your time.
Thank you for all those watching. Please do remember to share the link from this webinar. And until next time, it's goodbye. And we look forward to finally being able to celebrate the Engineering Talent Awards with you later this year. Thank you ever so much. Bye-bye.